You want me to stop yelling? Am I talking too loud for you? This video is all about one of my favourite books ever. That's right, I'm back on my shit. And it is the first sunny day ever here in Scotland, and that means that not even for you guys am I willing to close this curtain. Just gonna have to put up with half of me looking like it's melted away, which in all fairness is exactly what happens when I go outside in the sun. Between the vitiligo and like the Scottish skin, I should just really never leave my house. Oh wait, that's actually not funny anymore, is it? Moving swiftly on, welcome to my first ever If You Have Read This, Then You Should Read That video. This is another one of those super highly requested videos that you guys have been waiting on since I first shoved this original book at your faces and was essentially in full blackmail terms like read it or we can't be friends anymore. So to not keep you in suspenders any longer, that book is of course The Screaming Staircase, which is the first book in the Lockwood & Co series by Jonathan Stroud. I started reading this series 2 years ago as a completed 5-book series and I am still not over it. Despite reading all of these other books, I still have a book hangover. Nothing can cure it. Well, until very recently, but we'll get to that in a minute. In case you're the one person out of my subscribers who hasn't picked this up, let me give you a quick recap on this series. The Screaming Staircase takes place in a London without a timestamp, wherein ghosts have started to come back to life. Unlife, undeath, awake death. Ghosts are back. And they're killing people. They're killing quite a lot of people. If you are ghost touched, you will go mad and then you will die. This problem, however, can only be solved by people who are under the age of 18, because once you are a full and mature adult, you lose the ability to see ghosts. At the beginning of this book, we meet Lucy Carlyle, and she is running away from a horrible incident that happened in the north of England. She was part of an agency, she was on a case, and a lot of people died. Lucy now just wants to forget everything that she's been through, but she finds that without a reference she cannot get a job anywhere in London, and thus she stumbles over Lockwood & Co. Lockwood & Co is a tiny agency consisting of 2 people. The enigmatic rapier-wielding Anthony Lockwood and the extremely sarcastic, bookish researcher George. George Cubbins owns my soul. Lucy takes the job with Lockwood & Co and hijinks ensue. This series literally has all of the things in it that are staple Leanne things. There's found family, there's tons of banter, there's the creepy location of London itself, but there are also ghosts and haunted houses. I don't often say a book or a series is perfect, but for me, Lockwood & Co is that series. Since I got hooked on it and subsequently got all of you hooked on it, loads of you have been finishing the series and are like, where do I go now? I feel utterly bereft. There's nothing else like this series out there. What do I pick up to fill the hole? And so here I am to fill all of your bookish holes. I don't know, man, that went a place. Let's go. First off, let's talk straight up dupes. Let's say you've literally just finished the Lockwood & Co series and now you want something that is exactly like that. In that case, I would direct you to A Gap Year in Ghost Town by Michael Pryor. In this book, we are once again back in a world where some people can see ghosts, but the majority of us cannot. We follow Anton Marin, who is just leaving high school and doesn't really know what he wants to do with his life or whether he wants to go to university. And so his father convinces him to take a gap year and to come and work for the family business. The family business, of course, being ghost hunting. The problem is that the Marin family operate very much on the fringes of the ghost hunting community. This book is set in Melbourne, and when the Marin family emigrated there, they discovered that they had a very different attitude to the majority of the people in Melbourne. The Marin family want to gently ease the passage of the ghosts into the next world, and basically everybody else is just about the slashing and the getting rid of them. When Anton comes to work for the family business, he meets Rani Cross. She is very skilled in hand-to-hand combat, and she very much enjoys the slashy. The two of them are never ever going to see eye to eye ever. Except the two of them find themselves working together at the exact point that Melbourne comes under threat from a huge spike in ghost manifestations. So again, pretty much exactly like the Screaming Staircase, we know that the ghost problem is getting worse, but we just don't know why. Essentially, if you close your eyes and squint a little bit, this one could easily take part in the Lockwood & Co universe, just somewhere else in the world. And if we're talking almost perfect dupes, there is the other series which actually lives on my shelf along with Lockwood & Co. It has managed to reach those lofty heights. It was the series that I went on to when I finished Lockwood & Co, and it gave me almost all of the feels that I was missing. That series is of course The Enemy by Charlie Higson. Another bonus about this one is that it's another completed series. There are 10 books in this one, so you get even longer to stay in the world, but you also don't have to wait to see if the author's eventually going to finish it. Adult male fantasy. Sorry, that's a terrible cough that I've got there. Comes out when I speak the truth. In The Enemy, we enter a world that has been ravaged by a sickness and has hundreds of question marks hanging over it. In this book, we meet a group of kids who have all headed towards a local supermarket to try and find food. They've become a family and they help each other to survive. In that way, this book is very much Lockwood & Co. There's definitely banter, there's definitely a lot of that whole family will fight, but we love each other deep down thing. That was one of my favourite things about Lockwood & Co. And then into this precious little world that these kids have carved for themselves walks a kid from seemingly out of nowhere who promises that there are groups and groups of people who have survived. And not only have they survived, but they have created for themselves a kind of paradise. And so off into this treacherous world of post-sickness London go our lovely supermarket teens to try and find a better world. The only flaw in this dupe is that you really shouldn't get attached to anybody in this series for like any length of time at all. Nobody. Next up, let's talk ghosts with agendas. In Lockwood & Co, the ghosts all kind of have like a half consciousness. They're all sort of aware and they all sort of want a thing, but they're never complete people. If you also enjoyed that, the first book that I think that you should check out is The Family Plot by Cherie Priest. This one follows Dahlia and she works for Music City Salvage, which is a company that goes into old houses and estates and literally rips out everything in them that is sellable, from the copper pipes to the chandeliers to the wood around the windows. The problem is that Music City Salvage are kind of down on their luck. They're always just one job away from utter ruin. So when one day Augusta Withrow walks into their offices and says, "I want to sell you what's left of my family estate for dirt cheap, you can have it, I just don't want to deal with it anymore," they really can't not take it. So Dahlia takes a crew and a lot of trucks and they rock up at the Withrow house. Because they're so broke, they have decided that to try and save some money, they're going to stay on the property. But they quickly discover that not all is exactly as it seems. Next up, if you're in it for the ghosties, I have got The Waiting Room by F.G. Cottam. The main character in this reminds me a lot of Anthony Lockwood because Martin Stride is literally an ex-rock star, which is very much what Anthony Lockwood sees himself as. Martin has bought a large Edwardian estate on which he plans to retire with his family and bring them up in true English splendour. At the end of this estate, there is a large abandoned waiting room and a railroad track. This waiting room was literally used to house dying and injured men coming back from the Great War who were going to be transported to other places in England. It was a pretty grim place. It's completely derelict and Martin doesn't go anywhere near it. The problem is that this waiting room has not been entirely quiet since they moved in, and the weird things that are happening there lead him to think of a bit of a scheme. He then gets in touch with Julian Creed, who is a TV psychic. Julian is essentially like Budget Most Haunted, where he'll go into a place and be like, "Ooh, I feel spirits." He doesn't actually believe in any of it, but he puts on a really good show. Except when they agree to go in and film this one particular place, he very abruptly starts to think that maybe, just maybe, ghosts are actually a thing. For our next category, let's look at books that give you that really ominous, there's something behind you feeling. You know those bits in Lockwood and Co where you were reading about them hunting ghosts and they were walking into these rooms and setting traps and you're like, no, 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 no. You haven't. If that's the kind of thing that you like in your books, then I have two recommendations for you. The first one is a horror-y sci-fi and it is The Loneliest Girl in the Universe by Lauren James. This book follows Romy Silvers as she makes her way on her own through deep space. Romy is the only surviving member of her ship, a ship that was on a mission to get to the next survivable planet in our galaxy. This ship was chock full of people in stasis, plant cuttings, animals in stasis, and then a horrible thing happened. And now Romy is literally the only person left alive on the entire ship. Romy fills her days by fixing the ship. Since she was a little girl, she was trained to work with the navigating systems and the engineering systems. But one day, one of the communications from Earth brings Romy the message that war has broken out. NASA is no longer going to be able to send her messages with any kind of regularity. But a new ship has been launched, which is hurtling towards her with new technology. But then a horrible question occurs to Romy. When you're alone in space and you have started to not trust the one person who is hurtling towards you and cannot be stopped, what do you do? Next up, for those creepy there's something watching you vibes, I have another one of my favourite series. This is The Diviners by Libba Bray and it is the first in a completed 4-book series. Set in 1920s New York, we follow Evie O'Neill, who is arriving in the city after being somewhat run out of town. See, Evie has this one particular ability where she can touch objects and know a lot about their previous owners. She has been sent to New York after spilling unwanted secrets at a party, and there she is going to live with her uncle. The thing is, Evie imagines 1920s New York as being some sort of flapper fantasy. That's what she really wants in her life, but unfortunately what she finds there is that she's living with her uncle in an occult museum. Her uncle is an academic, he is extremely smart and he consults with the police on all sorts of supernatural cases. When Evie gets there, she thinks it's going to be really easy to give him the slip. He's a soft touch after all, but giving him the slip is not as easy as she thought it was going to be, and she finds herself in the middle of a crime scene. This has very Lockwood and Co vibes in that nobody is perfect, but everybody is trying their best to do something. The audiobook of this one contains the actual song of the really nasty nursery rhyme that's in the book, and I did not need that to take up free real estate in my head, but now it lives there. So for our next category, what do you do if you were in Lockwood and Co for the lols? For me and a lot of other people who read Lockwood and Co, one of their favourite things about the series was the banter. Throw together a bunch of misfits who were probably never meant to live together in a house and you're gonna get a lot of sarcasm. Well, some sarcasm and some just, I want to poke you in the eye with a sharp stick. First of all, let's go back to a book that I talked about very recently. It is also part of a completed 5-book series with lots of places to go after it, and that is Soulless by Gail Carriger. Soulless is the first book in the Parasol Protectorate series and an absolute lolfest. We follow Alexia Tarabotti. She, in a world full of werewolves and vampires and ghosts and other ghoulish things, is soulless. She not only has no magical powers, but her magical powers stop everybody else from being magical. So if she touches a vampire, their fangs retract. If she touches a werewolf, they are unable to change into their wolf form. And you know, if she touches a ghost, then they're poof, they're actually dead. Completely dead. Gone. At the beginning of this book, Alexia is attacked by a vampire who just doesn't know who she is, which is very unfortunate for him. But when the paranormal police essentially turn up to investigate this incident, Alexia meets Lord Macon. In this area of London, all of the supernatural beings report to Lord Macon, and he is not happy about this incident. He's also not happy about Alexia. He does not like her very much at all. But Alexia overhears a few things during this incident that makes her think that strange things are happening in London. And being as she is a lady who has absolutely no joy in being a lady and does not want to be married off, thank you very much, she decides that for some actual entertainment, she's going to investigate. Next up, if you're looking for banter, I am going to direct you to one of my old favourites. This is a series that I have talked an awful lot about and that I have a deep and abiding passion for. Mostly because everybody is terrible to each other and it's great. I am of course talking about the Illuminae files by J. Kristoff and Amie Kaufman. In this world, we are introduced to Katie and Ezra on the worst day of their lives. They live on a little planet that is essentially an illegal mining colony, and they have lived there quite happily for a long time. And then one day, a bunch of starships turn up from one of the mega corporations who really should have been in charge of the mining there, and they proceed to try and wipe out the entire colony. Doesn't sound very funny yet, but give me a second. Katie and Ezra both get rescued but end up on different ships fleeing the disaster on their colony. They are essentially being hunted through space with far too many people on these ships to make it comfortable to survive. And they're, you know, in a race against time between being blown out of space and getting to somebody who can help them. Like Lockwood and Co, initially when you give the description of these books, it just sounds like an adventure series with, you know, like imminent death and disaster and definitely things over your shoulder. But then we remember that on the morning that these ships turned up to blow up the whole colony, Katie and Ezra were splitting up. Kinda messily. Kinda quite messily. Yeah, very messily. And now between the two of them on these two ships while they are on a countdown to disaster, they are communicating with each other about their breakup. And you know, about staying alive, but mostly about what Ezra did wrong. Because he did quite a few things wrong. Yeah. And for our final category, what about books that have that us against the entire world feeling? In Lockwood & Co, this tiny little agency is vying for work amongst all these huge agencies, just trying to stay afloat and really trying to feed themselves sometimes. But later on in the series, because they exist out with these big corporations, they start to put together pieces of a puzzle, and they discover that it might just be their tiny little agency that stands in the way of, you know, certain destruction of the world, or like fixing this ghost problem forever. So what do you do if you're in it for that kind of camaraderie? Well, I shall tell you. First of all, I have a series that I haven't talked about for literal years and I hate myself for it. That series is another completed series called Star for Me, and that is of course the Monstrumologist series by Rick Yancey. In these books we follow Will Henry. He is an orphaned apprentice to the very strange Dr. Warthorpe. Dr. Warthorpe has an odd speciality, and that is monstrumology. He literally is the Sherlock Holmes of weird, creepy, supernatural monsters. Will Henry's father died in service to Dr. Warthorpe, and that's why he lives there. He really has nobody else. But Dr. Warthorpe also really has nobody else because he's a very strange individual. Then when a plague of very strange monsters starts to take over the town of New Jerusalem, because this series, although it feels like Victorian London, is actually Victorian America, Will Henry discovers that there are more people in the world than just him and Dr. Warthorpe. More people who specialise in monstrumology, more people who know what they're doing. And very slowly Will Henry's world starts to expand. This is another series that immediately pops to mind whenever I think about Lockwood & Co, because it has so many of the same vibes. It's an oldie, but it's a goodie. And finally, for an us against the world, is my new favourite series ever. Or my, like, equally as good as Lockwood & Co, I love it very much series. This is the series that I'm going to be talking about for a very long time, so I hope that you like it too, series. I hate telling people that things are my favourite sometimes. And this book is, you guessed it, The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter by Theodora Goss, the first book in the Athena Club trilogy. I put this on a TBR last month thinking that I was going to enjoy it and probably like it fine, and not realising that it was going to completely transform my brain. This is literally the only book that I can think about right now. It's the only series that I want to read, and it is entirely because it ticks all of the same boxes as Lockwood & Co. In fact, as books to follow up Lockwood & Co go, this would be a recommendation that ticks pretty much all of the categories that we've just run through. It's like the Mega Mushroom in Mario. It's the one to win them all. At the beginning of The Alchemist's Daughter, we we meet Mary Jekyll as she buries her mother. Unfortunately, with her mother, she also buries her mother's living, the money that came to her while her mother was alive, which sustained their house and their servants. And one cannot be a lady in Victorian London without some money. Mary goes home, she sadly gives all of her domestics their notice, and then she sets about trying to find a way to get money for herself. Then she discovers in her father's papers that her father's old associate, Mr. Hyde, somebody who scared her as a child, is still wanted by police with a very large sum of money on his head. And Mary, being a practical sort of person, decides that if she can get this money, she will literally be set up for life. So she takes herself and her wanted notice and all of her father's letters, and she walks her way across London to the celebrated detective Sherlock Holmes. This series is the retelling of my dreams because on her quest, Mary does not just meet Sherlock Holmes, she also meets lots of other daughters like her. She meets Beatrice Rappaccini, Justine Frankenstein and Catherine Moreau. All women who have been created and abandoned by their fathers. And when they get together, oh boy, nobody can stand in their way. I have finally done it. I have finally got a video that I can point people to when they finish Lockwood & Co and they hate me because it's over. This video is going to save me from many people being very annoyed at me for a long time. As always, if you have read any of the books that I've talked about in this video, please let me know in the comments. Do you agree with me? Are they perfect dupes for Lockwood? Have I convinced you to maybe read Lockwood & Co itself? If so, very exciting, and please tell me because I have a sponsorship scheme set up just in my own head. As in, whenever anybody tells me that they've read any of the Lockwood & Co books, because of me, I literally put a tally on a list and I let myself buy a book for everyone. So if you're one of those people, make sure to comment below. After my book buying ban, I want lots of tallies. Do you have any recommendation for books to read after Lockwood & Co? If so, let everybody know, especially me, because I want to check them out. And of course, if you have liked this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up so more people can find things to read after Lockwood & Co. Please subscribe for more of them and more of my face. I will speak to you guys very soon. Goodbye! Not gonna lie, I just kind of want to read The Screaming Staircase now. I was afraid this would happen.